Suddenly, my daughter-in-law became very sweet and prepared a special herbal tea for me. Because I had a bad cough, I gave it to her own mother who was visiting us. 1 hour later, she let out a blood-curdling scream and, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never expected my daughter-in-law to show me kindness. Not after 4 years of cold shoulders, eye rolls, and barely concealed contempt. So when Victoria walked into my kitchen that Tuesday morning with a warm smile and genuine concern in her voice, every instinct I had as a mother screamed that something was wrong. "Jacqueline, that cough of yours sounds terrible," she said, setting her purse down on my marble countertop with unusual care. "You've been dealing with it for what, 3 weeks now?" I looked up from my morning coffee, surprised by the gentle tone. Victoria rarely spoke to me directly unless Russell was in the room, and even then her words were measured and polite, but never warm. Today felt different. Too different. "It's just a persistent cold," I replied, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. "Nothing serious." Victoria shook her head, her long blonde hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through my east-facing window. "No, this isn't normal. I can hear you coughing from upstairs at night. It's keeping Russell awake, and honestly, I'm worried about you." Worried about me? The words felt foreign coming from her lips. In the 4 years since she'd married my son and moved into our family home, Victoria had never once expressed concern for my well-being. If anything, she'd made it clear that she saw me as an obstacle to her perfect life with Russell. I set down my blue porcelain cup, the one my mother had given me for my wedding 41 years ago, and studied Victoria's face. Her green eyes held what looked like genuine concern, but I'd learned not to trust appearances where my daughter-in-law was concerned. "I've been meaning to see the doctor," I said carefully. "Just haven't found the time." "Actually, I might be able to help you with that cough," Victoria said, moving closer to where I sat at the breakfast table. "My grandmother taught me about herbal remedies when I was growing up. There's this special tea blend she used to make. It's incredible for respiratory issues." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what looked like notes. "It's made with eucalyptus, elderflower, and a few other herbs. Completely natural. And it works so much better than those harsh cough medicines from the pharmacy." I watched her fingers move across the screen, noting how her wedding ring caught the light. The 3-carat diamond that Russell had saved for months to buy, working overtime at his engineering firm to afford something that would impress her. I remembered how proud he'd been when he showed it to me, how his eyes lit up as he described Victoria's reaction. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, meaning it despite my reservations. Maybe I was being too paranoid. Maybe Victoria was finally trying to build a relationship with me. "I'll prepare it for you this afternoon," she continued, her smile growing brighter. "I have all the herbs at home. My mother always said this particular blend was like magic. It can cure almost anything." The mention of her mother made my stomach tighten slightly. Doris was scheduled to visit later that day, one of her regular Tuesday afternoon stops where she'd sit in my living room and chat about her garden while I served tea and homemade cookies. Victoria rarely participated in these visits, usually finding excuses to be elsewhere. "Will you be joining us when your mother comes by?" I asked. Victoria paused, something flickering across her face too quickly for me to interpret. "Of course. I want to make sure you drink the tea while it's fresh. The herbs work best when the tea is consumed within an hour of brewing." She gathered her purse and headed toward the back door that led to the garden. "I'll be back around 2 o'clock with everything prepared. Just make sure you don't take any other medications before then. Herbal remedies can interact with modern drugs in unexpected ways." After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, the familiar sounds of the house settling around me like an old friend. The refrigerator hummed its steady rhythm, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the half-hour, and somewhere upstairs I could hear Russell getting ready for work. I picked up my mother's recipe notebook from the counter beside me, running my fingers over the worn fabric cover. 3 generations of women had recorded their cooking secrets in this book, from my grandmother's handwritten instructions for Sunday pot roast to my own notes about Russell's favorite chocolate chip cookies. The pages smelled like vanilla and thyme, holding memories of family dinners and holiday celebrations. Flipping through the yellowed pages, I found my grandmother's section on herbal remedies. She'd been quite knowledgeable about natural healing, having grown up during the Depression when doctor visits were a luxury few could afford. Her notes were meticulous, written in careful cursive that was becoming a lost art. Eucalyptus tea, I read aloud, finding the entry. Excellent for respiratory congestion, but must be prepared carefully. Too strong a concentration can cause severe stomach distress and other complications. A chill ran down my spine as I continued reading. My grandmother had written detailed warnings about proper dosages, noting that what healed in small amounts could harm in larger ones. She'd even recorded a story about a neighbor who'd been hospitalized after drinking an overly concentrated eucalyptus brew. I closed the notebook and walked to the window overlooking the back garden. William had planted rose bushes along the fence line 15 years ago, and they were just beginning to show their autumn colors. He'd spent countless weekend mornings out there, pruning and fertilizing, creating a sanctuary where we'd shared coffee and conversation during our 38 years of marriage. 5 years had passed since his heart attack took him from me, but I still felt his presence in this house. In the creaky floorboard by the bedroom door that he'd always meant to fix. In the coffee maker he'd programmed to start at exactly 6:15 every morning. In the wooden bench beneath the old oak tree where he'd proposed to me 41 years ago. This house held our entire life together, every joy and sorrow we'd shared. Russell had been born in the upstairs bedroom, taking his first steps on these hardwood floors. His childhood artwork still decorated the refrigerator, faded now, but too precious to remove. This was where we'd celebrated birthdays, hosted family dinners, and comforted each other through difficult times. It was also where I'd welcomed Victoria as a daughter 4 years ago, hoping she'd become part of our family's story. Instead, she'd made it clear from the beginning that she saw this house, and me, as temporary obstacles to her vision of the perfect life with Russell. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Russell appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair still damp from the shower, adjusting his tie with the same careful precision his father had always shown. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek as he passed. "Victoria said she's going to make you some special tea for that cough. Isn't that sweet of her?" "Very sweet," I agreed, studying my son's face. At 38, Russell still had the earnest expression that had made him such an endearing child. He saw the best in everyone, sometimes to his own detriment. "She's been researching natural remedies all week," he continued, pouring coffee into his travel mug. "She really wants to help you feel better." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think that Victoria's sudden concern was genuine, that maybe she was finally ready to accept me as part of her family. But something nagging in the back of my mind wouldn't let me relax. "Russell," I said carefully, "how has Victoria been feeling lately? She seems different today?" He turned to me with a puzzled expression. "Different how?" "More attentive. Concerned about my health. It's just not like her usual behavior." Russell's face tightened slightly, the way it always did when he sensed criticism of his wife. "Victoria's always been caring, Mom. Maybe you just haven't noticed before because you two don't spend much time together." There it was, the gentle rebuke that reminded me I was walking on thin ice. Russell had made it clear over the years that any perceived criticism of Victoria would drive a wedge between us. He'd already pulled away from me emotionally. I couldn't risk losing him entirely. "You're right," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm probably just not used to being taken care of." He relaxed, kissing my forehead before heading toward the door. "The tea will do you good, Mom. Victoria knows what she's doing with this herbal stuff. Her grandmother was practically a medicine woman." After Russell left for work, the house felt even quieter than usual. I found myself walking from room to room, touching familiar objects as if anchoring myself to something solid. The family photos on the mantelpiece told the story of our lives. Russell's graduation from Georgia Tech, our last Christmas with William, the wedding day when I'd gained a daughter-in-law but somehow lost a son. By 2 o'clock, I'd worked myself into a state of nervous energy that I couldn't quite explain. I'd cleaned the same kitchen counter 3 times, rearranged the living room throw pillows twice, and started a pot of coffee that nobody had asked for. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find both Victoria and her mother Doris standing on my front porch. Doris held a small bouquet of flowers from her garden, a weekly tradition that had started shortly after William's death and had become one of my favorite parts of these visits. "Hello, dear," Doris said, embracing me warmly. At 68, she was only 5 years older than me, but she had the gentle, nurturing energy of someone who'd spent her life caring for others. "How are you feeling today?" "Still fighting this cough," I admitted, stepping aside to let them in. Victoria followed her mother, carrying a thermos and a small cloth bag that presumably contained her herbal mixture. "I brought everything we need," she announced, setting her items on the coffee table in the living room. "This should have you feeling better by tomorrow." As I served Doris her usual cup of Earl Grey and arranged cookies on my grandmother's china plate, I watched Victoria prepare her special brew. She worked with practiced efficiency, measuring herbs from small containers and adding hot water from my kitchen kettle. "This smells wonderful," Doris commented as the aroma filled the room. "What herbs are you using, Victoria?" "Eucalyptus for the congestion, elderflower for inflammation, and a few family secrets," Victoria replied with a smile. "My grandmother's recipe was famous in our neighborhood. She helped cure dozens of respiratory problems over the years." The tea steeped for exactly 7 minutes while Victoria checked her watch repeatedly. When she finally strained the mixture into one of my blue porcelain cups, the liquid was darker than I'd expected, with an almost medicinal intensity to its fragrance. "Here you go, Jacqueline," Victoria said, presenting the cup with a flourish. "Drink it all while it's hot for maximum effectiveness." I held the cup in my hands, feeling its warmth through the delicate porcelain. Something about Victoria's insistence that I drink it immediately triggered an alarm in my mind that I couldn't ignore. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was years of reading people as a nurse before I married William, but every instinct I had was telling me to be careful. "Actually," I said, setting the cup down on the side table, "Doris mentioned she's been fighting a cold too. Why don't we share this? There's plenty here." Victoria's face froze for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that if I hadn't been watching carefully, I might have missed it. "Oh no," she said quickly. "I made this specifically for your symptoms. Doris has a different type of cold. This might not work for her." But Doris was already reaching for the cup. "That's so thoughtful, dear. I have been feeling a bit congested lately. A sip certainly wouldn't hurt." Before Victoria could protest further, her mother lifted the cup to her lips and took a generous swallow of the dark liquid. "Goodness, that's quite strong," Doris said, making a slight face. "But it does taste medicinal. I'm sure it will be very effective." Victoria watched her mother drink with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something in her eyes, panic maybe, that made my decision for me. "You know what, Doris?" I said casually. "Why don't you take the rest of that cup home with you? If it's as effective as Victoria says, it might knock out your cold completely." "Are you sure?" Doris asked, already finishing the last few sips. "Absolutely. Victoria can always make me another batch tomorrow." Victoria nodded stiffly, her earlier warmth replaced by something harder to identify. "Of course. I'll prepare a fresh batch for you tomorrow morning." The 3 of us spent the next hour chatting about Doris's garden, the upcoming autumn festival, and Russell's promotion at work. It was a pleasant enough visit, but I noticed Victoria kept glancing at her mother with an odd intensity, as if waiting for something to happen. Around 4 o'clock, Doris suddenly doubled over in her chair, her face contorting in agony. "Oh God!" she gasped, clutching her stomach. "Something's wrong. Something's very wrong." The scream that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard, raw, animalistic, filled with a pain so intense it seemed to tear through the very fabric of the afternoon air. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, carrying Doris toward Atlanta Regional Hospital while her agonized screams still echoed in my mind. I stood in my living room, staring at the blue porcelain cup that had contained Victoria's healing tea, my hands trembling as the pieces of a horrifying puzzle began falling into place. Victoria paced frantically near the window, her phone pressed to her ear as she tried to reach Russell at work. "She just collapsed," she kept repeating into the phone. "We don't know what happened. Some kind of food poisoning, maybe?" Food poisoning. The lie came so easily from her lips that I wondered how many other lies she'd told over the years that I'd simply accepted because I wanted to believe my son had married a good woman. I picked up the cup, noting how Victoria's eyes darted toward it nervously. The remaining drops of liquid in the bottom had dried to a dark, almost black residue that looked nothing like any herbal tea I'd ever seen. My grandmother's warnings about eucalyptus concentration echoed in my memory, but this seemed like something far more dangerous than an overly strong medicinal brew. "The doctors will figure out what made her sick," I said quietly, watching Victoria's reaction. She stopped pacing and turned to me, her green eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine distress. "I don't understand how this happened. That tea recipe has been in my family for generations. My grandmother made it for everyone in the neighborhood." Tell me about your grandmother," I said, settling into my armchair with forced casualness. "What was her name?" Victoria hesitated, just long enough to make me notice. Margaret Chen. She lived in a small town outside Savannah." The name felt practiced, rehearsed. I made a mental note to research Margaret Chen later, though something told me I wouldn't find much information about this mysterious herbal healer. "And she taught you everything about medicinal herbs?" "Well, not everything," Victoria admitted, her fingers worrying the edge of her sweater. "I've been studying on my own for the past few years. Reading books, researching online. It's become quite a passion of mine. A passion she'd never mentioned in 4 years of living in my house. I thought back through countless family dinners, holiday celebrations, and casual conversations. Victoria had never once discussed herbal medicine, never shown any interest in natural healing, never even kept a garden despite having access to the large backyard that William had maintained with such care. "When did this passion begin?" I asked. "After we got married," she said too quickly. "Russell encouraged me to find a hobby, something to keep me busy during the day." Another lie. Russell had never mentioned Victoria's interest in herbal medicine, and he wasn't the type to keep his wife's hobbies secret. He'd always been proud of Victoria's accomplishments, whether real or imagined, and would have bragged about her healing knowledge if it existed. The front door opened, and Russell burst into the living room, still wearing his work clothes and looking frantic with worry. "How is Doris?" he asked, immediately going to Victoria and pulling her into his arms. "Is she going to be okay?" "The doctors don't know yet," Victoria said, burying her face against his shoulder. She just started screaming and clutching her stomach. It was horrible, Russell. Absolutely horrible. I watched them embrace, noting how Victoria's body language had shifted the moment Russell arrived. Gone was the nervous energy, the darting glances, the hesitation in her voice. Now she was the concerned daughter, the innocent victim of a terrible accident. "What did the paramedics say?" Russell asked, stroking Victoria's hair with gentle fingers. "They thought it might be food poisoning or some kind of allergic reaction," I answered when Victoria remained silent. "They asked what she'd eaten and drunk today." Russell's eyes met mine over Victoria's head. "Did you tell them about the tea?" "Of course," I said, though I'm sure that wasn't the problem. Victoria's used that recipe many times before. The lie slipped out before I could stop it, a test to see how Victoria would react. She pulled back from Russell's embrace, her eyes widening in what looked like panic. "Actually," she said carefully, "this was the first time I'd made this particular blend. I've made other herbal teas before, but never this exact combination. So now the story was changing, from a family recipe used for generations to a first-time experiment. I filed this information away, adding it to the growing list of inconsistencies in Victoria's narrative. Maybe we should go to the hospital, Russell suggested. Be there for Doris. The doctors said they'd call as soon as they knew more, Victoria replied. There's no point in sitting in a waiting room for hours. Her reluctance to face the medical professionals struck me as odd. If my mother had been rushed to the hospital after drinking something I'd prepared, wild horses couldn't have kept me from her bedside, demanding answers and offering whatever information might help the doctors treat her. Instead, Victoria seemed content to wait at home, far from the questions that doctors might ask about the exact ingredients in her herbal mixture. After Russell left to pick up dinner from our usual Chinese restaurant, I found myself alone with Victoria again. She sat on the couch, staring at her hands, the picture of a worried daughter. But I'd had 63 years of life experience, including 38 years of marriage to a man who taught me to trust my instincts about people. And every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong with this picture. Victoria, I said gently, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. She looked up, her face carefully neutral. Of course. Have there been other times when people got sick after drinking your herbal teas? The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. Victoria's face went through several micro-expressions: surprise, fear, calculation, before settling on injured innocence. What are you implying, Jacqueline? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question. No, she said firmly. This has never happened before. I would never intentionally hurt someone with my remedies. Intentionally. The word choice was interesting. It left room for accidentally hurting someone, for making mistakes with dosages or ingredient combinations. It was the kind of careful phrasing someone might use if they were telling a partial truth. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, where family photos chronicled the years of joy and sorrow that had filled this house. My eyes fell on a picture from last Christmas, showing Russell and Victoria beside our tree, both smiling at the camera. But looking at it now, I noticed something I'd missed before. Russell's smile was genuine, full of love and happiness. Victoria's was perfect, but somehow empty, like a mask she'd learned to wear. Tell me about the early days of your marriage, I said, not turning around. Were you happy? Of course we were happy, Victoria replied, but I could hear the tension creeping into her voice. We still are happy. Russell seems happy, I agreed. But you? Sometimes I wonder if you're content with the life you've built here. Silence stretched behind me. When I finally turned around, Victoria was staring at me with undisguised hostility, all pretense of daughterly affection gone. What exactly are you trying to say? I'm trying to understand why my daughter-in-law, who has barely spoken to me in 4 years, suddenly became so concerned about my health that she prepared a special herbal remedy, and why that remedy put her own mother in the hospital. Victoria stood up slowly, her hands clenched at her sides. Are you accusing me of poisoning my own mother? I'm asking you to help me understand what happened today. What happened, Victoria said, her voice rising, is that my mother had an unexpected reaction to a natural remedy. These things happen with herbal medicine. It's not an exact science. Then why didn't you warn us about potential side effects? Why didn't you start with a smaller dose to test for reactions? Why were you so insistent that I drink it immediately? Each question hit its mark, and I could see Victoria struggling to maintain her composure. She was intelligent, I'd give her that. Intelligent enough to manipulate my son for 4 years without him suspecting anything. But she wasn't prepared for this level of scrutiny from someone who'd already survived 63 years of reading people and situations. I think you're overwrought, Victoria said finally, adopting a condescending tone that reminded me exactly why we'd never bonded. It's been a stressful day, and you're looking for someone to blame. I understand that, but I won't be your scapegoat. She gathered her purse and headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to pack a bag and stay at the hospital tonight with my mother. When you've calmed down and can think rationally, maybe we can discuss this like adults." After she disappeared upstairs, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the echoes of our conversation and the lingering smell of that terrible tea. The blue porcelain cup still sat on the side table, its contents now completely dried, leaving behind a dark stain that looked almost like blood. I walked to my bedroom and retrieved the small wooden box where I kept important documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, and William's final letters to me. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small digital recorder he'd given me years ago for capturing family stories and memories. The recorder still worked, its memory nearly empty except for a few recordings of Russell as a child telling made-up stories about dragons and adventures. I deleted those precious files with a heavy heart, knowing I needed the space for something far more important. If Victoria was dangerous, and every instinct I had was telling me she was, then I needed evidence. I needed proof that would convince Russell, protect myself, and ensure that whatever had happened to Doris today would never happen to anyone else. I slipped the recorder into my sweater pocket and went to the kitchen, where I carefully scraped the dried residue from the teacup into a small plastic bag. Whatever Victoria had put in that brew, the doctors would be able to identify it when they analyzed Doris's blood work. The sound of Victoria's footsteps on the stairs made me quickly hide the bag in my jewelry box upstairs. When she came back down carrying an overnight case, I was sitting innocently in my chair, hands folded in my lap. "I'll call you when I know more about Mom's condition," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Victoria," I called as she reached the door. "I hope Doris recovers quickly, and I hope we can figure out what went wrong with that tea recipe." She paused without turning around. "Sometimes old remedies don't work the way we expect them to. Maybe it's better to stick with modern medicine." After she left, I called Russell to let him know where Victoria had gone. He was relieved that she was with her mother, proud of her dedication as a daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was praising his wife for rushing to the bedside of the woman she might have poisoned. That night, I lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. The grandfather clock chimed every hour, marking time in a rhythm that had comforted me since William and I first moved into this house 41 years ago. But tonight, those sounds felt different, ominous somehow, as if the house itself was warning me of danger. Around 3 a.m, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through my bedroom window, I watched Victoria's sedan pull away from the curb and disappear into the darkness. She hadn't stayed at the hospital after all. The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed my worst fears. Doris was stable but still critical, suffering from severe poisoning that the doctors couldn't yet identify. They'd found traces of an unknown plant compound in her system, something that didn't match any common herbal remedies. Russell left early to be with Victoria at the hospital, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing certainty that my family was in more danger than any of us realized. I spent the morning researching herbal remedies online, learning about the fine line between healing and harming that separated medicine from poison. What I discovered made my blood run cold. In the right hands, plants could heal. In the wrong hands, they could kill. And I was beginning to suspect that my daughter-in-law's hands were very, very wrong indeed. The call from Dr. Henderson came at exactly 9:47 on Thursday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing my third cup of coffee, and staring at the empty spot where that terrible blue porcelain cup had sat just 2 days earlier. The doctor's voice was professional but concerned, the tone medical professionals use when they're about to deliver news that will change everything. "Mrs. Williams, I need to discuss Mrs. Chen's condition with you. As the person who was present when she consumed the herbal mixture, your input could be crucial to her treatment." My heart hammered against my ribs as I gripped the phone tighter. "How is she, doctor?" "She's stable, but we've discovered something troubling in her blood work. The plant compounds we found don't match any standard herbal remedies. In fact, Some of these substances are known to cause severe organ distress when consumed in concentrated amounts. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I reached out to steady myself against the marble countertop, the same surface where Victoria had prepared her healing tea with such careful precision. What kind of plant compounds? We're still running tests, but preliminary results show high levels of compounds typically found in plants that should never be consumed internally. Mrs. Williams, I need to ask you directly. Do you have any reason to believe the tea Mrs. Chen drank was prepared incorrectly or contained ingredients beyond what was stated? The question I'd been dreading hung in the air between us. If I voiced my suspicions about Victoria, there would be no taking it back. But if I stayed silent and someone else got hurt. Doctor, I think you should speak with my daughter-in-law, Victoria Chen. She prepared the mixture and I'm concerned there may have been errors in the preparation. A pause. We've been trying to reach Mrs. Chen since yesterday. She hasn't returned our calls. Do you know how we can contact her? My blood turned to ice. Victoria hadn't been returning the doctor's calls. The woman whose mother was fighting for her life in intensive care was avoiding the medical professionals who could provide answers and potentially save Doris. She should be at the hospital with her mother, I said slowly. Mrs. Williams, Victoria Chen hasn't been to the hospital since Tuesday night. The nursing staff says she left around 11 p.m. and hasn't been back. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just learned. Victoria had lied to Russell about staying at the hospital. She'd disappeared for 2 days while her mother fought for her life. And she was actively avoiding the doctors who needed information to treat Doris. The sound of Russell's key in the front door made me quickly compose myself. He walked into the kitchen looking exhausted, his usually neat appearance disheveled from what I assumed had been sleepless nights at the hospital. "How's Doris?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Russell slumped into the chair across from me, running his hands through his hair. "Not good, Mom. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. They keep asking about that tea Victoria made, wanting to know the exact ingredients. But Victoria's been so upset she can barely talk about it. So that was the story Victoria was telling, that she was too distraught to provide medical information that could save her mother's life." "Where is Victoria now?" I asked carefully. "At her friend Sarah's house. She couldn't handle being at the hospital anymore, seeing her mom like that. Sarah's been taking care of her since yesterday." Another lie, but this one told with Russell's complete belief in its truth. My son's trusting nature, which had always been one of his most endearing qualities, was being used against him by the woman he'd married. "Russell, has Victoria ever mentioned studying herbal medicine before this week?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "Not specifically, but she's always been interested in natural health. She reads a lot of books about alternative medicine." "What books?" "I don't know, Mom. Health books, wellness magazines. Why does it matter?" Because I was beginning to suspect that Victoria's herbal knowledge came from research into plants that could harm rather than heal, but I couldn't say that to Russell without proof. "I'm just trying to understand how this happened," I said. "The doctors are having trouble identifying what made Doris sick." Russell's face darkened. "Are you suggesting Victoria did something wrong? Because if you are, I won't tolerate it. She's devastated about her mother. The last thing she needs is accusations from my family." The protective anger in his voice reminded me of conversations we'd had throughout his marriage. Any question about Victoria's behavior was met with immediate defensiveness, as if I were attacking her rather than trying to understand her. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," I said quietly. "I just want Doris to get better." After Russell left to return to work, I found myself alone with thoughts that grew darker by the hour. I kept remembering Victoria's insistence that I drink the tea immediately, her panic when Doris consumed it instead, and her strange absence from the hospital where her mother lay fighting for her life. I walked upstairs to the guest room where Victoria and Russell had been living since their marriage. It felt wrong to invade their privacy, but my growing fear for my own safety overrode my reservations about snooping. The room was neat, almost sterile, with few personal touches beyond Victoria's extensive collection of skincare products and designer clothes. I searched through her dresser drawers and nightstand, finding nothing more suspicious than credit card bills showing expensive purchases that seemed beyond what Russell's engineering salary could support. But in the back corner of her closet, hidden behind a hanging organizer, I found a small wooden box that made my heart stop. Inside were dozens of small glass vials, each labeled with handwritten names I didn't recognize. The labels were in Victoria's careful script: oleander extract, foxglove concentrate, castor bean preparation. Below each name were numbers that looked like dosages and dates that went back over 2 years. My hands trembled as I photographed each vial with my phone, not fully understanding what I was looking at, but knowing instinctively that these weren't healing herbs. The names sounded ominous, dangerous, like something from a witch's brew rather than a grandmother's remedy chest. At the bottom of the box was a leather notebook filled with Victoria's handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, my horror grew with each entry. Subject showing improved compliance after low-dose treatment. Increased fatigue and confusion noted. Will continue regimen. Target experiencing persistent respiratory symptoms. Time to escalate to final phase. New obstacle requires different approach. Traditional methods too slow. The clinical language, the references to subjects and targets, the careful documentation of symptoms. This wasn't the journal of someone studying herbal healing. This was the record-keeping of someone conducting systematic harm. And on the last page, written in fresh ink that couldn't be more than a week old, JW. Persistent cough provides perfect cover. Final solution required before inheritance complications arise. Mother visit creates opportunity for testing and misdirection. JW. My initials. Jacqueline Williams. I was the target. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the closet door frame to keep from falling. Victoria hadn't been trying to heal my cough. She'd been trying to kill me. The persistent respiratory symptoms weren't from a cold. They were from whatever she'd been giving me gradually over the past weeks. And Doris, sweet, innocent Doris, had nearly died because she'd accidentally consumed what was meant to be my final dose. With shaking hands, I photographed every page of the notebook, then carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Victoria couldn't know I'd discovered her secret, not until I figured out how to protect myself and get help. As I crept back downstairs, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Russell's number. "Mom, I have great news." His voice was bright with relief. "Doris is awake and talking. The doctors say she's going to make a full recovery." Thank God. Whatever Victoria had intended to do to me, at least her mother would survive the misdirected attempt. "That's wonderful, Russell. Is Victoria with her?" "She's on her way to the hospital now. Sarah drove her over. Victoria's been so worried, but now that her mom's awake, I think she'll finally be able to relax." Would she? Or would Doris's recovery create a new problem for Victoria? If Doris could remember what happened, if she could describe the taste of the tea or her symptoms, would that expose Victoria's plan? "I think I'll visit Doris tomorrow," I said. "Bring her some flowers from the garden." "She'd like that. And Mom? Thanks for being so understanding about all this. I know it's been hard, having Victoria upset and distracted." Understanding. If only Russell knew how much I understood now. That evening, I sat in William's old study, surrounded by the books and papers he'd accumulated during his 40 years as an accountant. Hidden among his tax documents and financial records, I found what I was looking for: the details of his life insurance policy and the inheritance he'd left me. $300,000 in savings, plus the house valued at $500,000. Nearly $1 million in total assets that would pass to Russell when I died. And if Russell predeceased me, or if something happened to our relationship, everything would go to his surviving spouse. Victoria had married into a family with substantial wealth, but she couldn't access it while I was alive and healthy. My persistent cough, which I now realized was the result of gradual poisoning, would have been attributed to natural causes when I finally succumbed. Victoria would have consoled my grieving son, inherited a fortune, and no one would have suspected murder. The inheritance complications mentioned in her notebook suddenly made perfect sense. Victoria needed me dead, but she needed it to look natural. I thought about all the meals she'd prepared for me over the past month, insisting that I needed better nutrition while fighting my cold. The herbal teas she'd started bringing me 2 weeks ago, claiming they would boost my immune system. The vitamins she'd bought specially for me, saying Russell was worried about my health. How long had she been poisoning me? How close had I come to dying before Doris accidentally saved my life by drinking that final, concentrated dose? My phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Coming home tomorrow morning. Want to make you a fresh batch of tea to celebrate Mom's recovery? This time I'll make sure the recipe is perfect." I stared at the message, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. Victoria wasn't giving up. Doris's recovery was just a setback in her plan, not an end to it. She was coming back tomorrow to try again, but this time I would be ready for her. I spent the night going through William's old business contacts, looking for anyone who might be able to help me without involving the police prematurely. My evidence was circumstantial. Photographs of mysterious vials and a notebook that could potentially be explained away as research or fiction. I needed more proof before I could convince anyone, especially Russell, that his beloved wife was attempting to murder his mother. At 3 a.m., I finally found what I was looking for. David Brewster, an old friend of William's who'd become a private investigator after retiring from the police force. If anyone could help me gather the evidence I needed while keeping me safe, it would be David. I composed a careful email, attaching the photos I'd taken and explaining the situation as objectively as possible. David had known our family for 20 years. He'd understand the delicate nature of accusing Russell's wife of attempted murder. As dawn broke over the autumn landscape outside my kitchen window, I received David's response. He was taking the case immediately and would be at my house within 2 hours. For the first time in days, I felt something approaching hope. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. But as I heard Victoria's car pulling into the driveway at exactly 8 a.m., I realized that the most dangerous part of this nightmare was just beginning. She was back, and she was carrying another thermos. Victoria stood in my kitchen doorway with that same false smile she'd worn 3 days ago, the thermos clutched in her hands like a weapon disguised as kindness. Behind her, Russell carried grocery bags, his face bright with the relief of someone who believed his family's crisis was finally over. "Mom, Victoria insisted on stopping to get ingredients for soup," Russell said, setting the bags on the counter. "She wants to take care of you while you're still recovering from that cough." I watched Victoria unpack the groceries with practiced efficiency: organic vegetables, free-range chicken, and several small packages I didn't recognize. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, the actions of someone following a carefully planned script. "That's very thoughtful," I managed, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through my veins. "How's your cough today?" Victoria asked, turning to face me with those green eyes that I now knew held nothing but calculation behind their apparent concern. "Much better, actually. I think it might finally be clearing up on its own." Something flickered across her face: disappointment, frustration, before the mask of caring daughter-in-law slipped back into place. "That's wonderful, but we shouldn't take any chances. I brought a different herbal blend today, something gentler than what I made for Mom. I've learned from that mistake." Mistake. As if nearly killing her own mother was simply an error in judgment rather than a deliberate attempt to murder me. Russell kissed my forehead before heading toward the stairs. "I'm going to shower and change, then head back to work. The promotion meeting I've been preparing for is this afternoon, and I can't reschedule again." The promotion meeting. Russell had been working toward this advancement for months, staying late every night and bringing work home on weekends. It was scheduled for today at 2 p.m., which meant he'd be gone for hours. Victoria had timed her return perfectly, waiting until she could have me alone without interruption. Don't worry about anything here, Victoria told Russell sweetly. I'll take good care of your mother. After Russell disappeared upstairs, the kitchen fell silent except for the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Victoria began unpacking her thermos and arranging small containers of what appeared to be dried herbs on my countertop. This blend is much milder, she said without looking at me. Chamomile, honey, and just a touch of eucalyptus. Nothing that could cause the kind of reaction Mom had. I forced myself to move normally, putting away the groceries while secretly observing every detail of Victoria's preparation. She worked with the same careful precision as before, measuring each ingredient and checking her phone for what appeared to be specific timing instructions. Victoria, I said carefully, I've been thinking about what happened to your mother. Have you considered that maybe herbal medicine isn't as safe as we thought? She paused in her measuring, just for a fraction of a second. What do you mean? Well, even natural remedies can be dangerous if they're not prepared correctly. Maybe it would be safer to stick with conventional medicine. Oh, I don't think that's necessary, Victoria replied, her voice taking on a slight edge. I've done extensive research since Mom's accident. I know exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. Extensive research. I wondered if that research had taken place in the past 3 days or over the past 2 years, documented in the leather notebook I'd found in her closet. Still, I pressed, wouldn't you feel terrible if someone else got hurt because of another mistake? Victoria's hands stilled completely. When she turned to face me, her expression was no longer that of a concerned daughter-in-law. It was cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. Are you trying to tell me something, Jacqueline? The question hung between us like a challenge. This was the moment of truth. Did I confront her directly or continue pretending ignorance while gathering more evidence? I'm just concerned, I said, choosing the safer path for now. Your mother nearly died. I'd hate for anything like that to happen again. Yes, Victoria said slowly. It would be terrible if anyone else got hurt because of herbal medicine. But her eyes were saying something entirely different. They were saying that she knew I was suspicious, and that made me dangerous. The sound of the shower starting upstairs reminded us both that Russell was still in the house. Victoria's demeanor shifted back to false sweetness, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the measuring spoon just a little too tightly. Let me finish preparing this tea, she said. I want you to drink it while Russell's still here, so he can see how much better you feel afterward. So he could witness what she believed would be my final improvement before the inevitable decline. I realized Victoria was creating an alibi. Russell would remember his mother feeling better after drinking Victoria's tea, making her eventual death seem even more natural and unexpected. I watched her add hot water to the mixture, noting how much darker this brew was than the chamomile tea it was supposed to be. The smell was wrong too, bitter and medicinal rather than floral and soothing. This needs to steep for exactly 10 minutes, Victoria announced, checking her phone again. The timing is crucial for the herbs to release their beneficial properties. 10 minutes. Enough time for Russell to finish his shower and leave for work, leaving me alone with Victoria and whatever was in that cup. My phone buzzed with a text message. David Brewster, responding to my early morning email. On my way. Don't consume anything she gives you. Stall until I arrive. Relief flooded through me. Help was coming. But I needed to survive the next 20 minutes without arousing Victoria's suspicions. You know, I said, settling into my chair with forced casualness. I've been reading about your family history. You mentioned your grandmother Margaret Chen was known for her herbal remedies. Victoria's stirring motion became more vigorous. What about her? I tried looking her up online, thinking I might find some of her recipes documented somewhere, but I couldn't find any records of a Margaret Chen in the Savannah area who was known for herbal healing. Not everything is documented online, Victoria said stiffly. Of course not. I was just curious about her techniques. Did she leave any written records? Family recipes passed down through generations? She died when I was young. I only learned what my mother remembered. Another inconsistency. Yesterday, Victoria had claimed her grandmother taught her personally. Today, it was secondhand knowledge through her mother. What does Doris think about your interest in herbal medicine? I asked. Victoria's spoon clattered against the side of the cup. Why would you ask that? Well, if it's a family tradition, I would think she'd be proud of you carrying it on. Mom doesn't. She's never been interested in natural healing. She prefers conventional doctors. Which explained why Doris had been so surprised by Victoria's knowledge of herbal remedies when she'd consumed that first terrible tea. Her own daughter had never shown any interest in such things. The sound of Russell coming downstairs interrupted our conversation. He appeared in the kitchen looking professional and confident in his best suit, the one he wore for important meetings. How's the patient? He asked, kissing Victoria's cheek. Much better, Victoria replied, glancing meaningfully at the steeping tea. She'll be feeling even better soon. Russell checked his watch. I hate leaving you both, but this promotion could mean an extra $20,000 a year. It would change everything for our family. $20,000 more in salary, plus eventual access to nearly $1 million in inheritance when I died. Victoria had calculated the financial benefits of my death down to the last penny. We'll be fine, Victoria assured him. Won't we, Jacqueline? Of course, I said. Good luck with your meeting, Russell. After he left, the house felt different, smaller, more dangerous. Victoria checked the tea's steeping time on her phone, then strained the dark liquid into my blue porcelain cup with ceremony that felt like a ritual. Here you are, she said, setting the cup in front of me with satisfaction. Drink it all while it's hot for maximum benefit. The same words she'd used 3 days ago. The same insistence on immediate consumption. The same terrible intensity in the liquid that no amount of chamomile could explain. I lifted the cup, feeling its warmth through the delicate porcelain. The smell rising from the tea made my stomach churn with recognition. This was the same bitter, medicinal odor that had filled the room when Doris consumed her dose. Victoria, I said, setting the cup down without drinking. I need to tell you something. Her eyes narrowed. What? I know what you've been doing. The mask finally slipped completely. Victoria's face transformed from false concern to cold fury, her green eyes blazing with undisguised hatred. Do you really? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I found your notebook, your collection of plant extracts, your documentation of symptoms and dosages. Victoria stood motionless for a long moment, processing this information. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, not the practiced sweetness I'd grown accustomed to, but something predatory and utterly without warmth. How long have you known? She asked. Since yesterday. The question is, how long have you been poisoning me? Poisoning? Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. Such a harsh word. I prefer to think of it as gradual wellness intervention. You tried to kill me. I tried to solve a problem, Victoria corrected. You were the problem, Jacqueline. Always hovering, always watching, always making Russell choose between his mother and his wife. Russell loves you. He would have chosen you anyway. Not while you were alive and influencing his decisions. Not while you controlled the purse strings and made him feel guilty about every penny we spent. The truth was finally emerging. This wasn't just about inheritance money. It was about control, manipulation, and Victoria's need to eliminate any competing influence over my son. So you decided to murder me. I decided to help you die naturally from the respiratory illness you'd already developed. The herbs I've been giving you simply accelerated the process. My blood ran cold as I understood the full scope of her plan. The gradual poisoning, the careful documentation, the creation of a medical history that would support a natural death from respiratory failure. And when the doctors found plant compounds in my system? Herbal remedies I'd been giving you with your full knowledge and consent. Tragic that they interacted with your underlying condition, but these things happen with alternative medicine. Victoria had thought of everything, planned for every contingency, except one. The problem with your plan, I said, is that Doris survived, and she can testify about what really happened. Victoria's smile widened. Can she? A 73-year-old woman with no medical training, claiming her daughter tried to poison her? Who would believe such an absurd accusation? The doctors who treated her, the toxicology reports, the evidence of an accidental overdose caused by my inexperience with herbal preparations. Tragic, but not criminal. She was right, and we both knew it. Without proof of intent, Victoria could explain away everything as accidents and mistakes. My word against hers wouldn't be enough to convince Russell or protect me from future attempts. But Victoria had made one crucial error in her calculations. She'd assumed I was as isolated and helpless as she'd tried to make me. The doorbell rang. Victoria frowned, glancing toward the front of the house. Are you expecting someone? Actually, yes, I said, standing up slowly. I am. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear Victoria behind me, her voice sharp with sudden panic. Who did you call? What did you tell them? I opened the door to find David Brewster, exactly as I'd remembered him, tall, silver-haired, with the alert eyes of someone who'd spent 30 years in law enforcement. Behind him stood a woman in a white coat carrying what appeared to be testing equipment. Mrs. Williams, David said, I brought Dr. Sarah Martinez from the State Toxicology Lab. We're here to help. Victoria's face drained of all color as she stared at David and Dr. Martinez standing in my doorway. For the first time since I'd known her, my daughter-in-law looked genuinely afraid, her carefully constructed facade cracking like ice under pressure. Jacqueline, what is this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This is justice, I replied, stepping aside to let David and Dr. Martinez enter. David, thank you for coming so quickly. David Brewster moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd handled thousands of dangerous situations during his 30 years with the Atlanta Police Department. His eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The thermos on the counter, the steaming cup of tea, Victoria's defensive posture near the kitchen sink. Mrs. Chen, he said politely, I'm David Brewster, a private investigator. This is Dr. Martinez from the State Toxicology Laboratory. We'd like to ask you some questions about the herbal remedies you've been preparing. I don't have to answer anything, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is harassment. Doctor. Martinez stepped forward, her professional demeanor calm but authoritative. Mrs. Chen, we're not here to harass you. We're investigating reports of accidental herb misidentification that may have caused serious illness. We're hoping you can help us understand what happened. The word accidental was carefully chosen, I realized. They were giving Victoria a way to explain her actions without immediately admitting to attempted murder. It was a smart approach. Let her think she could still control the narrative. My mother had an allergic reaction, Victoria said stiffly. It was an accident. I would never intentionally hurt anyone. Of course not, David agreed smoothly. We're sure it was unintentional. That's why we need to examine the herbs you've been using, to make sure no one else gets accidentally hurt. Victoria glanced toward the stairs, probably calculating whether Russell might return early from his meeting. I don't have any herbs here. I used everything up. What about the tea you just prepared for Mrs. Williams? Doctor, Martinez asked, nodding toward the steaming cup on the table. Could we test that to make sure it's safe? It's just chamomile, Victoria protested, but she moved protectively closer to the cup. Then you won't mind if we verify that, David said. Just to be thorough. I watched this careful dance between law enforcement and my daughter-in-law, marveling at how David and Dr. Martinez were handling the situation. They weren't accusing Victoria of anything criminal yet, but they were systematically eliminating her escape routes. Actually, I interjected, there might be other samples we could test. Victoria, didn't you say you keep your herbs in the guest room? Victoria's eyes widened with panic. She was realizing that I knew about her hidden collection, that her secret laboratory had been discovered. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice was shaking now. David looked between us, reading the subtext immediately. Mrs. Williams, would you mind showing us this guest room? As we all moved toward the stairs, Victoria suddenly bolted for the back door. But David was faster, moving with surprising speed for a man in his 60s and blocking her path before she could reach the garden. Mrs. Chen, running away doesn't look good, he said gently. Why don't we all sit down and discuss this calmly? Victoria looked trapped, her eyes darting between the three of us like a cornered animal. You don't understand, she said desperately. She's been making my life miserable for 4 years, always interfering, always criticizing, always making Russell choose between us. So you decided to make her sick? Dr. Martinez asked quietly. I decided to help her die peacefully from the respiratory illness she already had, Victoria snapped, then immediately realized what she'd just admitted. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's confession hung in the air like smoke, impossible to take back or explain away. Victoria, David said carefully, I think you should know that Dr. Martinez has been recording this conversation with your consent under Georgia's one-party consent law. Victoria's face went white. You can't use that. I didn't consent to anything. Actually, when you answered our questions about the herbal preparations, you implicitly consented to an investigation, Dr. Martinez explained. Everything you've said is admissible, but I could see that Victoria's mind was still working, still calculating. She wasn't defeated yet. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice gaining strength. You can't prove anything. Yes, I gave her herbal remedies for her cough. Yes, they might have been stronger than necessary, but I never intended to hurt anyone. I was trying to help. What about the notebook we found in your closet? I asked. The one documenting subjects and targets and dosage calculations? Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She hadn't expected me to have discovered her detailed records. That notebook, David said, pulling out his phone to show Victoria the photographs I'd sent him, contains some very interesting documentation. Medical-grade record-keeping for what you're claiming were simple home remedies. Dr. Martinez studied the phone screen, her expression growing more serious. These appear to be systematic trials with controlled dosages and observed effects. This isn't the work of someone accidentally overdosing herbal preparations. The handwriting analysis alone will be enough for a conviction, David added. But we also have the physical evidence, the plant extracts you've been collecting, the concentrated preparations, and now the fresh sample of whatever you were about to give Mrs. Williams. Victoria slumped against the kitchen counter, the fight going out of her as she realized the mountain of evidence against her. But even then, I could see her mind working, searching for one last angle. Russell will never believe this, she said finally. He loves me. He'll stand by me no matter what you think you can prove. It was her final weapon, the knowledge that my son was so completely under her influence that he might choose her even over overwhelming evidence of her guilt. Maybe, I said quietly. But Russell is also a good man who believes in truth and justice. When he sees the evidence, when he understands what you really are, he'll make the right choice. Will he? Victoria laughed bitterly. Russell hasn't made a decision without checking with me first in 4 years. I've trained him well. The casual cruelty in those words, the admission that she'd systematically manipulated my son's independence and judgment, made my heart ache. How had I failed to see what was happening to Russell? How had I let this woman isolate him so completely? Mrs. Chen, Dr. Martinez said, we're going to need you to come with us for formal questioning. You have the right to remain silent and to have an attorney present. As David began reading Victoria her rights, I found myself thinking about Russell. His promotion meeting would be over soon, and he'd return home expecting to find his wife caring for his mother. Instead, he'd discover that his wife had been systematically trying to murder me for months. "How do you tell your son that the woman he loves is a killer?" My phone buzzed with a text message. "Meeting went great. Got the promotion. Coming home to celebrate with my 2 favorite women." I showed the message to David, who nodded gravely. "We'll wait for him," he said. "He needs to hear this from someone who cares about him." Victoria looked up sharply. "You can't tell him like this. It'll destroy him." For the first time, she sounded genuinely concerned about Russell's well-being rather than her own situation. "You should have thought about that before you tried to murder his mother," I replied. As we waited for Russell's return, Dr. Martinez collected samples of Victoria's tea, carefully labeling and sealing each container. David photographed the remaining evidence in the kitchen, documenting the scene where Victoria had prepared what might have been my final dose. "How long do you think she's been doing this?" Dr. Martinez asked quietly. "Based on the notebook entries, at least 6 months of gradual dosing," David replied. "Probably longer if we dig deeper into her background." The thought that I'd been slowly dying for months while believing I simply had a persistent cold made me feel sick. How many opportunities had Victoria had to accelerate the process? How many times had I thanked her for her care while she was actually killing me? At exactly 4:15, we heard Russell's key in the front door. "Victoria? Mom? I'm home." His voice was bright with excitement and success, completely unaware that his world was about to shatter. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face glowing with the happiness of professional triumph, still carrying the leather portfolio from his presentation. "I got it," he announced. "Senior project manager, $23,000 raise, corner office with a view of the city. Can you believe it?" Then he noticed David and Dr. Martinez, and his expression shifted to confusion. "Mom? What's going on? Why are there strangers in our kitchen?" Victoria and I both started to speak at the same time, but David held up a hand to stop us. "Russell," he said gently, "I'm David Brewster. I was a friend of your father's. I think you need to sit down." Russell's eyes darted between all of us, finally settling on Victoria's pale, stricken face. "Victoria? What's wrong? Is it your mother?" "Your mother is fine," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "But we need to discuss some very serious allegations about herbal preparations that may have caused accidental harm." "What kind of allegations?" David pulled out his phone, showing Russell the photographs of Victoria's hidden laboratory. "Your wife has been systematically administering concentrated plant extracts to your mother, documenting the effects like a medical experiment." Russell stared at the screen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror. "That's impossible," he said finally. "Victoria's been helping Mom with her cough. She's been taking care of her." "Russell," I said gently, "Victoria hasn't been trying to heal my cough. She's been causing it." "No." Russell shook his head violently. "No, that's insane. Victoria loves this family. She would never hurt anyone." Victoria finally spoke, her voice small and defeated. "Russell, I can explain everything. Lane." "Then explain it," he said, turning to face his wife with desperate hope in his eyes. "Tell them they're wrong. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Maybe love, maybe regret, maybe just the recognition that her game was finally over. "I can't," she whispered, "because they're not wrong." The sound Russell made was barely human, a broken cry that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He staggered backward, gripping the doorframe for support. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why would you do this?" Victoria's mask slipped away completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Because she was in our way. Because as long as she was alive and healthy, we'd never really be free to live our own lives." So you tried to kill her? I tried to help her die naturally from an illness she already had. Russell looked between Victoria and me, his face a map of devastation. How long? He asked. 6 months of gradual treatment, Victoria admitted. Maybe longer. 6 months. Russell's voice was flat, emotionless. For 6 months, you've been poisoning my mother while I thought you were taking care of her. Russell, please. Don't. He held up a hand, his expression harder than I'd ever seen it. Just don't. He turned to David. What happens now? Now Mrs. Chen comes with us for formal questioning. There will be charges filed, probably attempted murder in the first degree. Russell nodded slowly, like a man accepting a terminal diagnosis. Victoria, he said without looking at her, I want you out of this house. Tonight. Forever. Russell, please, I love you. We can work through this. You tried to murder my mother. His voice was steady now, filled with quiet finality. There's no working through that. As David and Dr. Martinez led Victoria toward the door, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this, she said, but whether she was talking to Russell or me, I couldn't tell. After they left, Russell and I sat in silence in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of Victoria's final attempt. The thermos she'd brought, the untouched cup of tea that might have killed me, the evidence of 4 years of deception and manipulation. I'm sorry, Mom, Russell said finally. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. You couldn't have known, I replied, though part of me wondered if that was really true. I should have protected you. Instead, I brought a killer into our home. We sat together as darkness fell outside, 2 survivors of a war we hadn't even known was being fought. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if Victoria's departure had lifted a poison from the very air. But I knew our healing was just beginning. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a crisp January morning, making tea in the same blue porcelain cup that had once held Victoria's deadly concoction. But this time it was filled with simple chamomile from tea bags bought at the grocery store. Nothing more dangerous than flowers dried in a factory and sealed in paper packets. The morning light streaming through my east window felt different now, cleaner somehow, without the shadow of impending death hanging over my daily routine. My cough had completely disappeared within 2 weeks of Victoria's arrest, confirming what Dr. Martinez's tests had revealed. I'd been slowly dying from systematic plant extract poisoning for 8 months, not 6, as Victoria had admitted. 8 months of gradual weakening disguised as caring attention from a devoted daughter-in-law. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Russell stood on my front porch, holding a box of pastries from the bakery downtown and looking healthier than he had in years. The stress lines around his eyes had faded, and he'd regained the 15 pounds he'd lost during his marriage. Weight loss I'd attributed to work pressure, but now realized was probably the result of Victoria controlling his diet as carefully as she'd controlled everything else in his life. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek as he set the pastries on my counter. "How are you feeling today?" It was a question he asked every time we spoke now, still processing the horror of how close he'd come to losing me without ever realizing I was in danger. "Strong," I replied honestly. "Stronger every day." Russell nodded, pouring himself coffee from the pot I'd prepared. We'd developed new routines over the past 3 months, rebuilding our relationship without Victoria's manipulation, creating distance between us. He visited every morning before work now, and we had dinner together twice a week. Simple rituals that reminded us both what family was supposed to feel like. "Any word on the trial date?" I asked. Russell's expression darkened slightly. "David called yesterday. Victoria's lawyer is still trying to negotiate a plea bargain, but the prosecutor isn't budging. They want attempted murder in the first degree, 15 to 20 years. How do you feel about that?" Russell was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I feel like it's not enough," he said finally. 20 years for trying to murder my mother? For systematically poisoning you while making me believe she was taking care of you? It feels like she should spend the rest of her life in prison." The anger in his voice was still fresh, still raw. Russell was dealing with layers of betrayal that went far beyond the attempted murder. Victoria had stolen 4 years of his life, isolated him from friends and family, controlled his finances, his social interactions, even his relationship with me. He was discovering that almost every aspect of his marriage had been a carefully orchestrated manipulation. "She'll be 60 when she gets out," I pointed out. "That's most of her adult life gone." "Not enough," Russell repeated, "but I suppose it's justice." We ate breakfast in comfortable silence, a luxury I'd learned not to take for granted. During Victoria's reign, even our rare family meals had been tense affairs, filled with subtle criticisms and passive-aggressive comments designed to create distance between Russell and me. "I have something to tell you," Russell said as he prepared to leave for work. "I've been seeing someone." My heart skipped with surprise and, I had to admit, a flutter of anxiety. "Oh?" "Her name is Sarah. She's a nurse at the hospital where Doris was treated. We met during one of my visits to check on Doris's recovery." "How long have you been seeing her?" "About 6 weeks. I wanted to tell you sooner, but—" He trailed off, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "But you were worried about my reaction," I finished for him. Russell nodded. "After everything with Victoria, I wanted to be sure about my judgment. I wanted to make sure I wasn't making the same mistakes again." I studied my son's face, noting the way it softened when he talked about this new woman. There was none of the desperate intensity that had characterized his relationship with Victoria, none of the obsessive devotion that had blinded him to her true nature. "Tell me about her," I said. Russell's smile was genuine, warm, completely different from the practiced happiness he'd worn during his marriage. "She's kind, really kind, not performing kindness. She volunteers at a homeless shelter on weekends, and she's been taking care of her elderly father since her mother died 2 years ago." Sounds like someone who understands the value of family. That's what I thought. And Mom, she wants to meet you. Not because she has to, not because I'm pressuring her, but because she says she can't really know me without knowing the person who raised me. Tears pricked my eyes. After years of being treated as an obstacle to Russell's happiness, the idea of being welcomed as an important part of his life felt almost too good to believe. "I'd like to meet her too," I said. "Really? You're not worried about trusting my judgment again?" I reached out and took Russell's hand. "Sweetheart, Victoria fooled all of us. She was a master manipulator who spent years perfecting her deception. The fact that you fell for her lies doesn't mean your judgment is flawed. It means she was exceptionally good at lying. But what if I'm wrong again? What if I'm just seeing what I want to see? Then we'll figure it out together. But Russell, you can't live your life afraid to love again because one person betrayed your trust." After Russell left for work, I found myself thinking about Doris Chen, the innocent woman who'd nearly died because she'd accidentally consumed what was meant to be my death sentence. She'd made a full recovery, thank God, but the experience had shattered her faith in her own daughter. Doris and I had become unlikely friends over the past 3 months, bonding over our shared experience of Victoria's deception. She visited every Tuesday, the same day she used to visit when Victoria lived here, but now we talked honestly about the warning signs we'd both missed, the small cruelties we'd dismissed as personality quirks. "I keep thinking about all the times she seemed annoyed when I called," Doris had told me just last week. How she'd sigh when I asked about her day, or make excuses when I wanted to visit. I thought she was just busy with married life. But now I wonder if she saw me as an obstacle too. We'd both had to accept that we'd loved a person who didn't really exist. The Victoria we'd known had been a carefully constructed facade, designed to hide someone capable of cold-blooded calculation and systematic cruelty. Around noon, David Brewster called with an update on the investigation. Victoria's confession is holding up under scrutiny, he reported. The prosecutor has more than enough evidence for conviction, even if she recants everything she said that day. What about the plant extracts? Have they identified everything she was using? Dr. Martinez finished her analysis last week. Victoria had been using a cocktail of compounds that would have caused gradual organ failure over a period of 12 to 18 months. If Doris hadn't accidentally consumed that concentrated dose, you probably would have died within 6 months, and the cause would have appeared to be respiratory failure complicated by age and underlying health conditions. The clinical description of my planned death sent a chill down my spine, but also provided a strange sense of closure. I hadn't been paranoid or overly suspicious. Victoria really had been trying to kill me, and she'd come terrifyingly close to succeeding. There's something else, David continued. We found similar documentation in Victoria's apartment from before she married Russell. Medical-style records about someone identified only as MK, with symptoms consistent with gradual poisoning. My blood ran cold. She'd done this before? It looks that way. The dates suggest this happened about 6 years ago, right before Victoria moved to Atlanta and met Russell. We're working with police in her previous city to see if there were any unexplained deaths that match the timeline. The possibility that Victoria was a serial killer rather than a desperate woman who'd made a terrible decision changed everything. This wasn't about inheritance, money, or family dynamics. This was about a predator who targeted vulnerable people for systematic elimination. Have you told Russell about this? Not yet. I wanted to confirm the details first. But yes, he'll need to know. The prosecution may want to introduce evidence of a pattern of behavior. After hanging up, I sat in my living room surrounded by family photos that told the story of my life before Victoria entered it. Pictures of William and me on our wedding day, Russell's childhood milestones, holidays and celebrations filled with genuine love and laughter. Victoria had tried to make herself part of that story, but now I could see that she'd never really been family. She'd been a parasite, feeding off our love and trust while planning our destruction. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Through my front window, I saw Sarah climbing the porch steps, carrying a bouquet of winter flowers and looking nervous but determined. I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-30s with kind brown eyes and the practical demeanor of someone accustomed to caring for others. She was pretty in an understated way, with none of Victoria's calculated glamour, and she looked at me with genuine warmth rather than practiced charm. Mrs. Williams? I'm Sarah Martinez. Well, Sarah Collins, actually. Dr. Martinez is my sister. The connection clicked immediately. You're Russell's Sarah. I am. I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced, but I was in the neighborhood visiting a patient, and Russell mentioned you might like these flowers from our garden. She held out the bouquet, simple winter blooms that had been carefully arranged with obvious affection rather than professional expertise. They're beautiful, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Would you like some tea? Actually, Sarah said with a small smile, I was hoping you'd say that. Russell told me you make the best tea in Atlanta. As I prepared our tea, real tea from real tea bags, with nothing more sinister than honey for sweetening, Sarah settled into my living room with the ease of someone comfortable in domestic spaces. Russell talks about you constantly, she said, accepting the cup I offered. He's still processing everything that happened, but he lights up whenever he mentions time you've spent together since Victoria. He seems happier, I observed, more like the person he used to be before he got married. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. He's told me about the isolation, how Victoria gradually separated him from friends and family. It's amazing how manipulative people can make their victims grateful for the very control that's destroying them. Her insight surprised me. You sound like you have experience with that kind of situation. My first marriage, Sarah admitted. Not attempted murder, thank God, but systematic emotional manipulation that took me years to recognize and escape. That's why I can see what Russell's going through. The self-doubt, the fear of trusting his own judgment again. We talked for 2 hours, and I found myself genuinely enjoying Sarah's company in a way I'd never enjoyed Victoria's. Sarah asked questions about my life, my interests, my memories of Russell's childhood, not because she was gathering information for manipulation, but because she was genuinely interested in understanding the family she might become part of. "I have a confession," Sarah said as she prepared to leave. "I was terrified to meet you." "Why?" "Because Russell loves you so much, and I was afraid you'd see through me the way you eventually saw through Victoria." I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. "Sarah, if I could see through Victoria, she would never have gotten close to killing me. The truth is, I'm a terrible judge of character when people are determined to deceive me. But you figured it out eventually." Eventually. After she'd been poisoning me for 8 months and nearly killed her own mother. Sarah's expression grew serious. "Russell told me about the guilt he's carrying, how he feels responsible for bringing danger into your life. He's not responsible for Victoria's choices. I know that, and you know that, but Russell needs to forgive himself before he can fully move forward." The wisdom in her words reminded me why Russell had fallen for this woman. Sarah understood healing, understood the patience required to rebuild trust and self-confidence after betrayal. As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Williams, I want you to know something. If Russell and I do build a future together, I'll never try to come between him and his family. I've seen what that kind of manipulation does to people, and I would never want to be responsible for causing that kind of pain." After Sarah left, I sat in my kitchen as evening shadows grew long across the floor. The house felt peaceful, filled with the promise of new beginnings rather than the threat of impending doom. My phone buzzed with a text from Russell. "Sarah said she had a wonderful time meeting you. Thank you for being open to getting to know her." I typed back, "She's lovely. Bring her to dinner Sunday." Within minutes, he responded, "Really? Are you sure?" "I'm sure. It's time to start building new memories." As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment of peace. Victoria's attempt to destroy our family had ultimately made it stronger. Russell and I had found our way back to each other, Doris had become a true friend, and now there was the possibility of new love and new family connections. Victoria herself had become nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil sometimes wears a beautiful mask, but always reveals its true nature eventually. The last thing I did before turning off my bedroom light was to check the locks on all my doors and windows. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd learned the value of protecting what matters most. I was alive, I was free, and I was finally, truly safe. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new chances for happiness, new opportunities to love and be loved without fear. Victoria had tried to write the ending of my story, but she'd failed. The best chapters were still ahead of me. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.